Hi guys, good afternoon. Let's get started pretty much on time. Thank you very much for your interest in this session, fresh new look at the Microsoft integration landscape. Some of you may know me from my time in consulting services in New Zealand. That was about 6-7 years ago. My name is Emil Velinov, and now I'm a program manager from a team in Redmond called the Windows Azure Customer Advisory Team. Despite being Redmond managed, I reside in New Zealand, and respectively, I'm available to all of you. The Customer Advisory Team, just a couple of words about what we do, is part of the core product group for Windows Azure. In fact, we report up to Scott Guthrie. And we are there to engage directly with you, to understand your requirements, the design that you are intending for your solutions, and help you through that journey to make sure that you are leveraging the technology in the best possible way. As we work with you, we learn things that don't always work, and we basically provide that feedback back to the core engineers, the developers in Redmond, obviously with the intent to close the gap and improve the technology, or plan for new features that may not be presently there. So this is what the Azure Customer Advisory Team does. Being part of the product group, we are not utilization based or anything like that. So in a way, we are a free resource from customers' perspective. However, we do have a relatively strong selection criteria as to what projects we engage in to make sure that the project in question has the potential to generate interesting feedback and learnings from Microsoft perspective. And this is in a way the payback to Microsoft. So to be perfectly honest, I struggled a little bit putting the content together for today's session. And the reason for this is because integration is a very broad topic, and sometimes a challenging topic as well. And this is part of an architecture track. So do I go really high level and talk, stuff about architecture, or do I give you a little bit more meat and understanding of how the different bits and pieces in the Microsoft tool set actually work together? And at the end, I decided to actually go with a mix of these two. So I'll have a few high-level slides that give you sort of broad understanding of the different components that you have available to you today. And then I'm going to look at some specific features that just to spice the session up a little bit and not keep it too dry. So let me put it out there. That's a picture that you, in whatever your capacity within your organization is, you can probably relate to. I'm not talking too much about it because I want you to look at it, and I want 3, 4, 5 brave people to yell out loud, what thoughts does that provoke in your mind? What comes to your mind when you look at that picture? It's a mess. That's a thought, probably a valid one as well. All right. Security here, yeah. What else? Complexity, fantastic. I was waiting for this one to come. Yeah, what else? What? That's a fantastic observation as well. All right, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. What else? All right, yeah. So some of these things are not necessarily architecture. I will encourage you to ask these questions at the end. I'll try to leave 5 to 10 minutes free for Q&A, and I'll try to address some of these questions at least at a very high level. So that picture is actually, I put it up there to show that integration, if you were in that space 10 years ago when I was working with BizTalk, and it was BizTalk 2000, Beta 2 and BizTalk 2002 and 2004 and so on and so forth. That picture would have looked like just the bottom and probably the partners there on the far right corner. That's what it looked like at that point in time. And the solution to that picture or the integration space, the empty green box in the middle, was BizTalk Server. And yeah, you had FTP and you had WCF and WebF, but that was it. It was really simple. Microsoft, I need integration. Yeah, here is BizTalk. Fine. Right? And you are good at BizTalk. I know a lot of you are. Sorted. Now the complexity has increased dramatically. You need to be able to connect to software as a service providers, the likes of Salesforce.com and a bunch of others. You need to support mobile devices as part of connecting things together. And this is what integration is all about. But which device are we talking about? Are we talking about iPhone? Are we talking about Windows Phone, Android, Windows 8? And the list carries on and on and on. And then you have cloud solutions, things that your organization might want to deploy and deliver via the cloud platform. And on top of that, some of you coming from the enterprise side of the things, bottom of the picture, you still need to integrate to your on-premises line of business applications and so on and so forth. So if you're an enterprise customer, you have BizTalk, and BizTalk does address a lot of the connectivity requirements even in that picture. Right? So that's there. But then you have a startup. I just thought, oh, fantastic. I have a great idea. I'm going to connect phones, and I'm going to connect websites that put purchase orders through and that sort of thing. I don't have a data center. What do I do? Right? Buy BizTalk? No, that's not going to cut it. I just started out. I'm a uni student. So what I'm trying to say here is that a server product or an integration technology doesn't solve it all. And you really need a tool set to be able to address different needs and different perspectives. And those needs and perspectives are not necessarily purely technical. I mean, licensing comes immediately to mind, right? If I'm the student that just had a great idea, I can't commit $48,000 or whatever BizTalk costs now. I completely lost track of it. And to be honest, I'm not interested anymore in my capacity. But from an architectural perspective, when you think about delivering a solution like this, you need to think about the business drivers as well, right? So you need a technology as the Microsoft provider to support those needs. So that much about the fact that we need a tool set and a tool set that addresses the integration problem from different perspectives. So I borrowed the second part of that title from a marketing slide, which initially I thought sort of cheesy. And then I thought about it, of that tool set that we provide. I'm like, this is actually a good summary of how you, as an architect and an advisor to your organization, can leverage the cloud, right? If you have the ability to put your pinky in the water, test it out, see how it is, get confidence, then you would be a lot more willing to start committing more significant workloads in that space. And hopefully I'll show you what putting the pinky in the water actually means in that context here. So connect to the cloud. This is effectively what I just said. So you have an existing app running on premises. It could be BizTalk Server, or it could be just a web app, some sort of fulfillment or LOB, whatever the case is. And you need some additional functionality. You need to augment the capabilities of that application. Why not consider in your architecture, when you start thinking about how to deliver that project, leverage the cloud and some of the capabilities that exist in the cloud? I understand latencies from New Zealand. Absolutely, I live here and experience it every day. But especially in the context of integration, latency is not necessarily a deal breaker, right? Now, there is obviously data sovereignty scenarios or concerns. That may not be an issue either. If you encrypt the data and if it is really just in-flight data, then what is really the problem, right? It doesn't mean that when you start thinking about the cloud, you need to forklift everything that you have and all your customer data and credit card information to the cloud. You're just treating it as a pass-through environment in a way. So the second step from there, you sort of thought, OK, yeah, I can do things in the cloud, but actually the data stays still on premises or at the destination, wherever that destination is, right? So that was OK. That was a good proof of concept. The next step from there is I'm running a data center, and in that data center I have 16 servers dedicated to support the BizTalk workload. You need Active Directory, and you need SQL Server, and you need BizTalk Server, and you need a web server probably, and an FTP server, and something else, and something else. And the cost just goes exponential. And why do you keep the data center there or so many resources? Because probably one of your partners sends you a batch of, 5 gigabyte data overnight at midnight, for example. You process that data into your backend system through BizTalk over an hour, and then the 10 servers go to sleep and do nothing, and cha-ching, 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 the cost carries on and on and on. So why not run your workload in the cloud, if, of course, data sovereignty and some of these things are not a concern, or if you can work around them, of course, through encryption or other techniques, right? So you basically, in that scenario, you decide, OK, cloud is good. I'll forklift my workload into the cloud. And then finally, you are a startup, for example, or you've proven the capabilities and the applicability of cloud within your organization, and you go, I'm actually going to deliver the next generation integration solution. And this is going to run in the cloud as platform as a service, where Microsoft is managing those integration capabilities, and I really only care about data validation, data transformation, secure message delivery, whatnot. All these capabilities that an integration technology or set of technologies needs to provide. So in our portfolio, I'll just put a couple of names there of technologies that support those gradual steps of adoption of cloud. BizTalk Server 2013. Cloud is pretty integrated in it. And I'm going to show a demo later on how you actually very easily connect BizTalk Server to cloud. Windows Azure Service Bus, working in combination with BizTalk Server. The two technologies are integrated. I'm going to talk about that as well. And together, you've just adopted the cloud. You don't necessarily need to store data in the cloud or anything like that, right? But some of the processing happens there. For running in the cloud, when we launched Infrastructure as a Service, as an offering part of the Windows Azure platform, we now have BizTalk Server supported running in a virtual machine. And what's more than that, when you stand up a BizTalk machine out of the Windows Azure platform image gallery, there is an image there dedicated to BizTalk Server Standard, Enterprise, and Evaluation Edition. When you spin up a VM from that image, you start paying by the minute. So the scenario that I was talking about before, where you have a workload that executes overnight over an hour or so, and then everything goes to sleep, right? Perfect for this. You start up the VM at 11:30 at night. The batch comes in at midnight. You do the processing. 2 o'clock in the morning, you check through admin tools or whatnot in an automated way that the processing has completed. Shut the machine down. Next evening, the same thing. You've only paid for 60 minutes or 120 minutes or whatever time it took to process that batch of data for that evening. Built for the cloud. Azure Service Bus is there for connecting things. We'll talk about that as well. But we've launched a service, part of the Windows Azure platform, called BizTalk Services, or Windows Azure BizTalk Services. That will be extensively covered in the demo as well, so I'm not going to really talk too much about it right here. So here are a few scenarios, and I've already covered some of those with what we said so far. But basically, we are looking at 3 key buckets, if you wish, of solutions that we want to support through those technologies. So hybrid applications, enterprise business to business, and this is really referring to the X12s and AS2s of this world. And then you have software as a service integration at the end. I'm not going to cover that super extensively here. You can read out the bullet points there. But the value proposition, again, of leveraging the cloud as part of your solution, if not completely based your solution, is again elastic scale, cost reductions, pay as you go, pay by the minute. If the solution becomes extremely popular in the SaaS scenario, then you just elastically scale that infrastructure running in the cloud. When the load goes down, you scale it down and save on cost. Unrelated to integration, by the way, Ryan sitting there from DPE and myself have been closely engaged with a local customer, Circu. In fact, they've been part of the Scott Guthrie keynote customers. The cost reduction that these guys leveraged compared to running their solution, not integration, granted, but moving that solution to the cloud, 2/3 of the original cost. And that is without actually optimizing the development and test environments and resources for pay-as-you-go. In other words, I get given a VM running in Azure as a developer, and I'm just leaving that VM constantly on. Right? When I log off, I may configure my VM to go and shut down potentially through automation, and that will save us cost. So let's go next and actually look at the broader tool set, not just of some of the pillar technologies that we have there. So I'll start with the low-level platform technologies, which we, or most of us, are familiar with to some extent, at least at the architectural level. And we are talking really about WCF for delivering SOAP-based web services, supporting the WS star specifications, all that wonderful stuff that we've been in pain for almost a decade now. Then you have Web API out of the platform as well, becoming very popular. I don't know whether you are using it. If you are not, then do go out and use it. Makes things much simpler compared to WCF in terms of configuration, even interoperability, if you wish, since we are talking about integration. So I do encourage you to start leveraging Web API. But it is really supporting, at the end of the day, web services, either SOAP web services or RESTful web services. This is what these two technologies do. So the next technology in that tool set that I would throw in is workflow. And why am I talking about workflow? Please don't get confused again with shall I use workflow or shall I use bespoke orchestration. They are two different things. The reason I have workflow there is twofold. The first thing is that workflows since .NET 4.0 can be natively exposed as web services. In fact, when you look at Visual Studio, the template is workflow web service. And this is a stock standard WCF web service that you get at the end, backed up by a workflow template, effectively, that executes when a request comes into the web service endpoint. Workflow is, an overloaded term. I'll actually frame it and scope it down to say that in that context, I'm really looking at short-lived executions or short-lived templates, right? This is really within your application to enable some sort of templatizing, if you wish, of the steps that the execution needs to go through. And this is your actual execution runtime logic. It's not to coordinate a sales order came in here. I now need to approve it. It needs to go to the backend system. Someone needs to do something there. And then finally, I'm going to, send out a shipping advance notice, for example. That's not the sort of workflow that I'm talking about here. It's really completely integrated into your application logic. That's what I would like to see people using Workflow Foundation for. Initially, at least. If you are more brave and if you want to build a workflow product around it, absolutely, Microsoft will support you in this, right? But don't start comparing again, Workflow Foundation with bespoke server orchestration. They're completely different beasts. Service bus. So, how many of you are familiar with message queue? Okay, everybody. Surprise, surprise. that's what Service Bus is in the cloud. This is part of the Windows Azure platform. This is how I look at it, right? And I'm going to talk about specific capabilities in the Service Bus. But at the end of the day, conceptually, at the architecture level, this is a simple messaging service available in the cloud that gives me durable messaging, store and forward sort of pattern, doesn't really understand the messages very well, doesn't do validation, transformation of messages, and so on and so forth. I have a payload, put the payload on the Service Bus, it's going to deliver it to the other side. Whenever the other side is available, it will pick it up, and that's it. Conceptually, it's the same thing as MSMQ, right? Or any other message queuing technology, right? Now, of course, you can implement different messaging patterns in this Service Bus, one of them being straightforward queuing, where you have a queue, first in, first out, sort of, well, shouldn't be saying this, but yeah, basically you have a queue where you queue up a message and the other side receives the message when the other side is available and running and ready to accept that message, right? So that's queuing. The other pattern is pub-sub messaging that you can implement via the Service Bus, where in the Service Bus you put a message or submit a message to what we call a topic, and then you can have one or more subscriptions that you configure against that topic, and you put a criteria against each subscription what sort of messages it needs to consume of that topic, right? And then the final receiver or the target is associated with the subscription. So if I'm to depict the message flow, you have the sender, the topic in the Azure Service Bus, a bunch of subscriptions, each with a criteria, whether it should get the message or not, and then the receiver at the end picks up the message of the subscription. So the key thing here for the Service Bus, it's a low-level messaging technology available on the cloud. BizTalk server, to be perfectly honest, I don't want to spend time on this because I assume that 80% of the audience at least know what BizTalk is and what capability it has, right? So I'll skip that. BizTalk services. I told you that this is the new kid on the block, and this is typical integration capabilities, subset of them, delivered on the cloud as platform as a service. In other words, Microsoft managed environment, right? And we'll see what it does. But basically, there are two key scenarios for BizTalk services. The first one is the typical message validation, enrichment, transformation for XML messages in the Microsoft world, so to speak. And then the other one is B2B messaging. So we now enabled X12 and AS2 support inside BizTalk services, processing available in the cloud in a scalable fashion as well. Any questions at that point, by the way? Any questions? All right. So someone earlier in the beginning, when I asked what thought that picture was invoking in your mind, someone yelled out security. Around all of this, there are two security-related sort of technologies that you need to keep in mind. Active Directory, as we do know it, alongside with ADFS, Active Directory Federation Services. And then the second one is now the Cloud Active Directory or Windows Azure Active Directory, right? And you can actually synchronize your on-premises Active Directory with the cloud tenant that you have in the Azure platform, which serves as an identity provider and role provider and so on and so forth, right? Typical directory services, really. Good. All right. So just to show you how actively Microsoft is investing in that whole space of connecting systems together, I'll quickly run through a list of things that we've released recently. AMQP, I always spell that out in a different order. Never mind. How many are familiar with AMQP? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 5 hands probably. So this is a standard that came out of couple of open source organizations with assistance from Microsoft and a bunch of other vendors as well. It stands for Advanced Message Queuing Protocol. And the key thing that I want to say about that is that this is completely interoperable with the Java world. In fact, if you have done any work with JMS, for example, you will know that AMQP is actually natively supported in JMS, right? And now we have a provider for AMQP for JMS as well that can connect our world, to the JMS infrastructure as well. So server for hosting, managing workflows, we've released Workflow Manager 1.1. It is an on-premises installation or an on-premises technology. But of course, nothing is stopping you from running that technology in a cloud virtual machine as well, if you decide to choose so. BizTalk Server 2013. The investment there is quite clear. The only thing that I'll say about BizTalk Server 2013 is, the integration, the tight integration with the cloud technologies, the service bus, the storage, the cloud storage system as well. So BizTalk running in a virtual machine, yeah, that's supported now. And finally, as we discussed, we have Windows Azure BizTalk services. So this is quite an aggressive release portfolio for just 1 year, which hasn't finished yet. We still have another quarter, right? You can get a feel of how dynamic the release cycle is that touches on integration in general. So with that, let me jump over to my demo machine after I log in. Eventually, I'll get there. OK. Now we are going to hold on, I'll figure it out. Probably not. There we go. And yeah, perfect. All right. This is the most awkward screen switching system that I have seen so far, but what have I seen anyway? So what I forgot to say is what we are going to see as part of the demo. So we'll be a fictitious organization that is processing purchase orders, and it needs to support a variety of partners that can place a purchase order through our system. And we also need to do some sort of integration with their mobile workforce in the sense of providing notifications when they have a new purchase order or when a purchase order has been approved, that sort of thing. So for that purpose, in the cloud, we are going to use BizTalk services, Windows Azure BizTalk services, which is represented by that star-looking icon in the middle. We can accept an XML purchase order via HTTP. Then, depending on a criteria, if the total amount of the purchase order is greater than $100, we'll need some sort of approval. And that's why we are going to put that message on a service bus queue. If the purchase order is less than $100 total amount, then we are going to place it into Windows Azure Blob Storage. So all this is happening through BizTalk services running in the cloud. Now, our solution is becoming popular, and the big guys with X12 and AS2 start jumping on us to support them. We configure BizTalk services with X12 support in the form of partner agreements, if you are familiar with partner agreements from the BizTalk world. And then for purchase orders that do need approval, we are going to put that through BizTalk server. When BizTalk approves a purchase order, doesn't matter how it happens, we are going to put it in the same blob storage location in Windows Azure, where at the end, the mobile device can consume those entries, the approved purchase order entries, alongside with a dynamic notification that a purchase order has been approved. Now, that device could be an iPhone, it could be an Android device, it could be Windows Phone as well. So this is what we are going to see pretty much in the demo. the challenge to switch screens again. No, that's the black screen. I don't want the black screen. That's the good screen here. No, that's the good screen. Eventually, we'll figure it out by the end of the session. Don't you worry. All right. So the very first thing that I want to show you is actually some of the tooling that comes with BizTalk services. That's part of the BizTalk services SDK. You download the SDK, you install it inside Visual Studio 2012 or 2013. And this is what a bridge, well, this is what a message flow solution looks like. We are accepting data in via something that we call a bridge. The bridge is going to do some sort of validation and processing of the data. And then based on the criteria that we discussed, greater or less than $100, it is going to put the item either in Windows Azure storage or on a service bus queue. Then BizTalk server, oh, by the way, part of the processing, we are talking about stock standard purchase order schemas as we know them from BizTalk, right? There we go. Now, just so that we save a little bit of time, I'm going to also jump into some of the transformation. This is implemented as a mapping in BizTalk services. So that's a capability that is available for both XML messages, so XML to XML, or X12 to XML, or AS2 to X12. That sort of thing is completely possible. And I have a map. The mapper does look slightly different from BizTalk server. If you're a BizTalk developers, ignore that. That's beta, of course. It's new. Yeah, but that's where we do the transformation. And probably the most important part in that message flow is that XML bridge, XML purchase order bridge. This is effectively your processing pipeline, which starts with validating the message, enrichment of the message if you need to do that, transformation into a slightly different format, and then delivery to wherever. The interesting thing here in that picture is that what is not visible, this is a workflow. So internally, we are mixing and matching the technologies to support a specific workflow. So even though you don't realize this is workflow, it is. Right? And this is short-lived execution item in a way, if you wish. All right. So that much about the BizTalk Services SDK. Of course, when we look at the message flow, there are some configuration settings that you need to put into the components, like where is the queue that you want to submit the data to. Highlight here is that everything is declarative. There is no assemblies, if you wish. Right? Everything is declarative, and respectively, we treat everything as resources that you can basically push into the runtime environment. Anyway, so let me jump into the BizTalk machine and actually run a workload there. So I have a purchase order here. That's an XML message. Right? We are ordering 2 items that cost $28.50 and 1 item that costs $6, so the total is less than 100. We are going to place that inside the purchase order folder. By the way, I'm submitting to BizTalk services via BizTalk, right? Just so that I don't need to code anything. This is purely for the demo. And that data now, BizTalk picked it up, my local on-premises BizTalk, picked up the message, submitted it to BizTalk services. BizTalk services calculated the total, and then based on the total, it decided that it needs to put the data into the Windows Azure Storage location. I have the location here. That's Windows Azure Storage Explorer, a freely available utility. And if I go to TechEd, I'll see my purchase order at 343, right, which is now basically. So it landed in that environment. And respectively, if I want to do something slightly more complicated, which is put X12 inside the on-premises X12 folder, the total amount of this order is actually greater than 1,000. So I'm expecting BizTalk services to put that on the service bus queue. I have BizTalk configured to pick up from the service bus queue. And we can see that that went into the purchase orders folder. If I open this, it's XML, and it's calculated total amount, right? So all of that happened in the cloud as part of the BizTalk services configuration. Now I'm going to get that I'm going to get that purchase order and effectively approve it, expecting that it is going to land in Windows Azure Storage, right? Not a single line of code. All the technologies that we have here, and namely, we are talking BizTalk services running in the cloud, protected with ACS security, the access control service. This is our authentication and security solution in the cloud. So you have BizTalk services fronted with ACS. You have Service Bus that provides the queuing and store and forward pattern in the cloud. And then you have BizTalk, and then BizTalk sending to storage, and BizTalk services sending to storage. All of that without a single line of code. The only artifacts that we had to develop for this to happen are the purchase order schema and the mapping. Nothing else, right? And you see how everything works together. And this is basically one of the key things out of this session is that we walked through the portfolio of key technologies when we spoke of Web API and WCF and workflow and Service Bus and BizTalk Server and BizTalk Services, right? All of these actually work together really nicely and reduce the amount of coding and respectively chances of bugs, and the maintenance cost goes down as well. Any questions around this demo, by the way? One thing that I want to show you is, just as a sample, how BizTalk is configured to receive. So let's go to receive locations. How it is configured to receive from the service bus. So in BizTalk 2013, we have a transport type for your receive locations called SB messaging, standing for service bus messaging, of course. And if we open that receive location and go to the configuration of that service bus messaging adapter, the only thing that we need to do is provide the URL of the queue that we want BizTalk server to receive from and the authentication details for the ACS configuration that protects that service bus queue. So really, really simple. The same thing applies for sending to storage, for example, which is this send port here. Because the storage system in Windows Azure is exposed as REST web services, and you can talk to storage via REST, right? You can just use the web HTTP adapter that comes with BizTalk Server 2013. This is basically for consuming REST-based web services. So it's really easy. All right. Biggest challenge of the session is to get back somehow. Push the buttons, clear that. No, that's not going to work. Push the other button. I'll need help, please. Why is the black screen? No, that's not what I want. Clear? Okay, that's what happens when you put a monkey in front of that keyboard here. Yeah! Yeah, that's what we wanted to do. Cool. There is no more screen switching, so that was the downtime that we experienced here. So we are still staying within the 99.9% availability, hopefully. So I hope that this quick demo, without drilling into the details at an architectural talk, in fact, we drilled into too much details, shows you how easy it is to really put those technologies together, whether they are on-premises technologies, whether they are historically on-premises technologies that you deployed to the cloud, because the BizTalk instance that I was using is actually running in infrastructure as a service in Azure. I don't have anything running off my laptop, right? Yeah, then you had the service bus and BizTalk services. So how are people using these technologies together? Service bus, store and forward scenario in front of BizTalk, right? When I was in consulting and specializing with BizTalk, I was a big fan of message queuing. Unfortunately, that was mostly relevant to the enterprise scenarios inside the boundaries of your network. Right? Fantastic solutions using MSMQ services. With Service Bus, now that same scenario and the benefits of that scenario are enabled via the cloud across organizations. Right? So leverage this. BizTalk server connectivity using the Service Bus technology again. We spoke of AMQP, which is that cross Java protocol and standard, more importantly. Service Bus supports it. BizTalk doesn't. So if you need to talk from BizTalk or from BizTalk services for that matter to a JMS environment, that communication is best implemented via the Service Bus, right? Because, and it's really simple. When you, the only thing that you need to do to transport the messages between your source system, BizTalk or web services or whatnot, to a JMS system and leverage the power of AMQP is a change in the connection string when you talk to the Service Bus. So to connect to the Service Bus, there is something called a connection string. And if you follow all the Microsoft examples, then it's that long. And you take that and go transport type equals to AMQP, and then the Service Bus does the rest for you. So on the other side, JMS will see an AMQP message, and it knows how to deal with it. Right? If you didn't have the Service Bus, then how do you do it? It will become really difficult and complex. Let's see, connectivity to LOB via BizTalk from the outside firewall. All right. How many of you guys know about Service Bus Relay and what Service Bus Relay is? Not that many hands. OK. So there are two parts in the Service Bus. One of them is the queuing and the pub/sub environment that the Windows Azure Service Bus exposes. But it also has a service which is almost completely independent that we call the Service Bus Relay. And the Service Bus Relay acts as a rendezvous point in the cloud for web services. So I'm sitting on premises, I expose an endpoint, and if someone from the outside the organization historically needed to talk to me as an endpoint sitting inside the firewall, they need to do reverse proxy publishing. Right? That opens ports, and in some environments that becomes impossible. So the answer that you get from the network admin goes, nope, sorry, can't do. Right? What do you do? So in that scenario, through features that we enhanced WCF with, namely bindings that are specific to the Service Bus, you can configure that endpoint sitting on premises to register itself and require authorization and authentication in the Service Bus. So a consuming web service doesn't come to me anymore. It needs to go to that rendezvous point to send the request and receive the reply from. When they send the request, that request gets routed to me over that same outbound connection that I established with the Service Bus Relay endpoint. So from the on-premises environment, you only have outbound connectivity. Network admins usually don't have a problem with that, right? And that public endpoint is actually protected via ACS again. I spoke a little bit about how we are mixing and matching those technologies within our own products, and the use of workflow inside BizTalk services was obvious there. But there are other examples, and you can read them off. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we need to move quickly. So a couple of more things. There are technologies that are not necessarily part of the core integration portfolio, but you should really know about. The first one is Workflow Manager, which is basically a on-premises installation, so server if you wish, for managing and hosting workflows that runs on-premises. And speaking about mixing and matching technologies, the workflows that you deploy to Workflow Manager communicate with the external world via the Service Bus, which we also have the ability to run on-premises, by the way. So we released a technology called, obviously, Windows Azure Service Bus. What is not obvious here, actually, it's probably obvious somewhere underneath there, but that technology is available for on-premises deployments as well. right? So all the benefits, including AMQP support, you can deploy them as a server-side technology, so to speak. Sorry? Yeah, the last one, basically. Where is it? Oh, you can't see the cursor. Good, all right. BizTalk server, platform support updates, this is all the usual. The last two boxes are the interesting ones, right? Connecting BizTalk server to the cloud via new adapters for the service bus messaging, and for storage via the rich REST support that we have. SharePoint in the cloud, that's another interesting integration scenario. So BizTalk server can talk to Office 365, for example, SharePoint in the cloud, right? So if something happens in your SAP on-premises installation and that generates an approval request, that approval request via BizTalk can reach out to Office 365, SharePoint. The approval workflow executes there, and the message then comes back down to BizTalk and SAP potentially. If your organization chose not to deploy SharePoint as an on-premises installation. And running in the cloud, that's a beaten horse already, so we are going to skip that. Running BizTalk on a VM, we spoke already about the benefits of both elastic scale, if you need more resources, and that goes up and down as well. So you may think that your BizTalk installation is really small in the beginning and deploy to a medium-size infrastructure as a service virtual machine. And then in a month time you go, no, that can't keep up with the load. I'm going to upgrade that to an extra large or to high memory SKU and so on and so forth. Or alternatively, you can start adding horizontally virtual machines of a BizTalk image that you upload it to the cloud. So this is the elasticity and the high availability in a way for some of the workloads. How to get BizTalk server for development? MSDN. I'm not going to really talk about all this. The only thing that I'll say is that, again, BizTalk server is now available as an image as part of the Windows Azure Gallery. So within 3-4 minutes, you can basically get a fully provisioned BizTalk server for development needs or whatnot running in the cloud in a pay-as-you-go model. As part of your Azure subscription, you have the $150 free usage, and that BizTalk VM could be part of that as well. At the bottom, for non-MSDN customers, you can purchase BizTalk for a commodity price really for development purposes. BizTalk services, those are the key benefits. Managed service, configuration driven, we spoke about that. Dedicated deployment, this is important. So when you request a BizTalk service in BizTalk services, you actually get your own dedicated VMs. You are not really in a shared environment. So other people can slow down your solution because they are processing a large batch of items, right? So you are screened from that through dedicated VMs. Very, very, very high level architecture design, whatever you want to call it, behind BizTalk services. The bridge, which we have seen in Visual Studio, it can accept data at the front end via HTTP or SFTP. At the back end, it can talk using a number of protocols, FTP, SFTP, HTTP, all of these things. Blob refers to blob storage, service bus refers to the service bus, of course. One thing that is not obvious in that image or that picture is that the output of a bridge can become the input of another bridge. So you can basically chain bridges together. That's pretty important and allows for a lot of flexibility. If you want to talk to on-premises systems, LOBs, via BizTalk services, completely supported. In fact, this is a core scenario, right? So when you configure BizTalk services, it effectively creates a proxy of the BizTalk adapter service as you know it. And then the output of the bridge basically talks to that BizTalk adapter service via the service bus, so completely secure communication there. And then the BizTalk adapter service talks to your backend LOB systems, the SAP, Siebel, Oracle database, SQL database, right? So this is mostly how it works. The intent behind this slide is just to really show you how you can connect all these core integration technologies with each other. And it's all really SOAP, it's all really REST, and for some of the communication, we have native support, such as the service bus, for example, right? But those technologies basically can be no code put together in a solution very, very easily. Scenario guidance, again, at a very, very high level, point-to-point and pub-sub messaging at internet scale, service bus. Application level workflows, that would be Workflow Foundation. On-premises integration, that's BizTalk Server. Then dev test scenarios, we discussed that already. Deploy BizTalk up to an Azure VM. And cloud-based integration, this is BizTalk Services, right? In the future, what we do, we are very aggressive with our release cycles. Once again, you saw the list of technologies that we've released within the last 9 months. We are continuing with that. And you are only going to see more of cloud support, basically, everywhere. It's interesting, actually. It goes twofold. You're going to see everything on premises supporting and integrating with the cloud, but also everything that we do in the cloud will eventually make its way as an on-premises deployment as well, right? So that's important to understand. How many of you guys know about the Windows Azure Pack? All right, that's a surprising little bit. Good surprising in a way. So in the Windows Azure Pack, you get a subset of the Azure services, and you can enable them on premises. Key takeaways. Let me put them all out. So the tool set is available. Integration is not only BizTalk anymore, but it's not without BizTalk either, right? Because there have been concerns historically of what's the future of BizTalk. BizTalk is going to stay there, and as you can see, we are investing in supporting it in the cloud and all that other wonderful stuff as well. But this is not the only technology. So when you plan an integration solution, think about what is really most appropriate for the workloads that you are planning to support. New scenarios, yeah, Microsoft is innovating in the integration, of course. Significant opportunities for BizTalk partners. And this is really, that last item goes beyond just BizTalk Server. It really focuses around BizTalk services, right? There are a lot of new solutions that you as a partner or as an ISV or cloud solution provider can come up with based on BizTalk services and possibly integrating with BizTalk Server as well, and provide very unique value proposition to your end customers too. So I think that we are at the end. And at that point, I'll ask whether there are any questions. They may be related to the content, they may not be. If you have a burning questions that you want to ask around any of those technologies.
You said, obviously, drag and drop GUI, but those of us that need to dive deeper into the workflow, put some more scripting in that, assuming there's a scripted view of that workflow rather than just a standard drag and drop transformation.
Okay. So the question here was, what we saw as part of the Visual Studio tooling was a beautiful picture, but there is some execution and scripting that needs to happen underneath. Is there a scripting view of that? Just one clarification, are you specifically talking about the mapper, or are you talking about the whole tooling?
Well, the whole tooling is a lot of business logic that is going to be specific to the solution that you're doing.
Sure, absolutely. So the whole solution is going to be to require specific logic that is, relevant to your solution. The answer to that is that everything that you saw inside Visual Studio is declarative. So it is supported by XML-based representation of the visuals. right? There is no scripting as such behind that. You can look at the XML, and this is plain text, but ultimately the tooling is there to prevent you, or at least to shield you from the definition of that declarative definition of your work. So when you look at the capabilities, and that's a fixed set of capabilities, you have message validation, message enrichment, message transformation, and then message routing as well to one of the supported destinations. All of these things are declarative. So one question that comes to mind is, okay, when I do transformation, for example, I may need to execute some custom lookup against wherever, a web service that right. So at that point in time, the whole BizTalk services framework is extensible to enable you to plug in your own assembly. And in that assembly, you do whatever you need to do, right? So the validation components in that bridge, the enrichment components, they comply to certain public interfaces. You implement the interfaces, and now validation is suddenly completely up to you, right? But the definition of the schema for the data, the definition of the transformation, the definition of the bridge, all of that is completely declarative. Yeah. All of these items that I just listed, including your assembly, are treated as resources, and they can be individually uploaded to the environment, to the runtime BizTalk services environment, independently on each other, and then you stitch them together in a solution if you need to. That's how the X12 and AS2 agreements work. Any other questions?
So in the end, the components that goes inside each one of the steps of the tree works like can work like custom pipeline components that we have today on BizTalk. I create an interface, you call what is needed there, and then after that you plug in with the platform.
Yep. So the question here was, so all the components that are part of the bridge can be custom components that comply to certain public interface, and then you implement that interface with your own custom logic to do whatever you need? Yes. Any other questions?
Whereabouts is the messages for bus for that system?
Okay, so good question. Where are the messages in the... Thank you. Where are the messages in the service bus persisted? Where do they reside? So we spoke that the service bus unlocks or delivers store and forward capabilities, and obviously as part of that, those messages have to be temporarily stored before they are delivered to the final destination. I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to say that, because this is obviously part of the service bus internals. How to answer the question without answering it? The service bus receiving the data is transactional. So when you receive the 200 message back, right? That's a transactional submission effectively. And the same thing goes for the receive. Actually, no. For the receive, no. In the receive, on the receive side, you need to implement what we call a peak lock, whereby you get a message, so it's guaranteed at least once delivery, right? So you peek into the message, you consume the message, it's still in the durable storage of the service bus, it remains there, right, while you are processing it, but it becomes invisible to everybody else. So the message for everybody else does not exist, apart from the thread that you are running and is processing the message on premises, for example, right? So you complete the processing, you store that message in your database, for example, and then you delete the message, making it, destroying it effectively off the service bus. Right? Now, there is the scenario of where you process the message into your database, and when you try to go to the service bus to delete it, that connection fails because of network failure, for example, which means that the message after a certain period of time will that's a timeout, visibility timeout, will become visible for someone else to pick it up. That's why at least once delivery is guaranteed, right? Not only once. In most modern systems, by the way, this is being part of an architecture track here. In most modern systems, scalability is achieved not through ACID transactions. Eventual consistency is the way of implementing scalable systems. If you try to do everything transactionally, as in SQL Server transactions, that doesn't scale. No surprise that SQL Server itself only really supports scale-up model rather than a scale-out model, right? And that's why you are usually limited by the available hardware resources that you can purchase. How big is your check, right? With a scale-out implementation, with eventual consistency, you can start leveraging commodity hardware model and scale indefinitely, potentially. Unfortunately, SQL Server doesn't implement that yet. Make sense? So if you design new systems and you know that you're expecting high volume of data and throughput and all that sort of stuff, aim for eventual consistency. Try to break yourselves from, oh, I need a transaction here. You don't. As long as you know how to check whether the data has been processed already previously, then you can come back and either ignore that duplicate processing effectively that you may have been forced to do, ignore it, or if that has never happened, then go and process the data again. Cool. All right. Thank you.